a small, isolated town, deep in the countryside, there once stood an ancient and forbidden library. Legend told of a cursed book, a tome of unspeakable darkness said to be bound in human flesh and written in the blood of sacrificial rituals. The locals whispered of its existence, warning one another never to approach the dilapidated building that housed this sinister collection. But as with many dark tales, the call of the unknown always finds a soul curious enough to defy the warnings. The protagonist of this story is Rafael, a young man fascinated by the supernatural, who found himself increasingly obsessed with the legend of the book. Little did he know that in seeking answers, he would open doors that could never be closed. It all began one ordinary afternoon, when Rafael, while researching local legends, came across a short article dated decades ago, talking about the Forbidden Library. The words "cursed book" and "lost forever" echoed in his mind like a challenge. He felt a restlessness growing within him. There was something about this mystery that drew him, a force he could not explain, as if something beyond the physical world was summoning him. Rafael tried to push the thought away, but the call seemed to intensify each night, especially in his dreams. Always the same, a vision of a ruined library, shelves that seemed to reach the sky, and in the center, the book with a human leather cover waiting for him. On the night of a torrential storm, the sound of thunder seemed to whisper his name, and the force that called to him became impossible to resist. He knew he had to go to the library. Rafael braced himself, and driven by an almost supernatural curiosity, followed the overgrown path to the old building, now lit only by the lightning that cut through the sky. When he reached it, he pushed open the door with an unsettling creak and entered the hall covered in dust and cobwebs. The silence there was so thick it seemed suffocating, except for a distant sound, almost like a faint heartbeat, that echoed from somewhere deep within the library. Rafael explored the library cautiously, browsing shelves that seemed forgotten by time. Old books, some in unknown languages, covered in mold and dust, filled the room with a smell of decay and abandonment. He was about to give up, until his eyes finally fell on something different. In the darkest corner of the room, a stone table displayed a single book, surrounded by unlit candles. The cover, as legend had it, felt like human leather, and the cold touch on his skin made Rafael's blood run cold. Yet there was something that compelled him to open the book, even with the dark warning that echoed in his mind. Just one look, he thought, just to satisfy his curiosity. Opening the first page, Rafael realized that the book contained no ordinary words, but symbols and writings that seemed alive, moving slowly like ink snakes. As he tried to decipher them, a strange sensation took over his body, and the shadows around him seemed to stir. An icy wind swept through the room, and then he heard it, a whisper, low and menacing, as if the pages themselves were whispering unholy secrets in his ears. Each word he read seemed to pull him deeper, and he could no longer stop. Without realizing it, Rafael had uttered an invocation, and the air around him grew heavy, almost as if the room were breathing with him. The lights of the extinguished candles supernaturally reignited, with purple flames that cast macabre shadows on the walls. The book trembled in his hands, as if it were alive, and demonic symbols began to project themselves on the walls and floor. The room began to shudder, and reality around Rafael began to distort. The shelves seemed to twist, transforming into grotesque shapes, while a growing buzzing filled his ears. Suddenly, a presence made itself felt. Something ancient, far beyond his comprehension, had awakened. The library was now not just a physical place, but a portal. The shadows took shape, and humanoid figures made of pure darkness appeared, walking towards him. Rafael tried to retreat, but the invisible force held him captive. His breathing became difficult, and the temperature dropped drastically. Demonic apparitions, their faces twisted in expressions of agony, emerged from the shadows, crying out for release. The horror grew, but even more terrifying was the sense that something greater was coming. Suddenly, a loud sound, like the beating of enormous wings, echoed through the hall. And then, the demonic entity that Rafael had inadvertently summoned appeared before him, a colossal, undefined form of pure darkness, with red eyes that seemed to burn like coals. Time seemed to stop, and Rafael knew that his life as well as his soul was at risk. The entity did not speak with words. Instead, the communication was telepathic, with images and sensations invading Rafael's mind. He felt excruciating pain, as if his very soul were being ripped from his body. The book, now floating in front of him, demanded its toll, Rafael's life. His heart beat faster as he tried to fight against the power that dominated him. But there was no escape. The shadows closed in around him, and he saw, in a horrific flash, the hundreds of souls that had already been devoured by this entity, all trapped inside the book, their faces twisted in eternal expressions of pain and despair. Rafael knew that his only chance of survival was to undo the ritual, but it was too late. The book had chosen him, and the entity wanted his sacrifice. His body was lifted into the air by an invisible force, and he felt his life energy being drained. Her last scream of terror echoed through the library, but no one was there to hear it. The next morning, all was silent. The storm had passed, and the cursed book was back on the table, awaiting its next visitor.